Marty, we gotta go back to Genesis. Here on V'ger Please. My name is Joseph.
And I have and ever shall be your friend. Did you hear what I said, Joe?
I did.
I said I have and ever shall be your friend. Joe, you remember that time I told you that I have and ever shall be your friend? Because I said that.
You sure did.
I, your co-host Peter, have...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, I told you, I think, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, I told you about this, that I have and ever shall be your friend.
Yes. No, it was very touching the first time you said it, but maybe the fifth or sixth time it may have gotten a little old.
Well, hey, when you're home, because here we are doing a Patreon review of Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. Release date, June 1st, 1984. 3 of 13 Star Trek films written by Harve Bennett, directed by Leonard Nimoy, produced by Harve Bennett. And like half the script was the lines that I just repeated to you. Almost as many times as they do in the actual movie.
We should clarify, we did Wrath of Khan recently, and if you're a Patreon subscriber, of course you know that. But it was a lot of fun. We enjoyed it. We realized, wow, this is like maybe it'll be interesting to do all of these TOS movies, right? Like, why don't we run through these?
Fair, we skipped the first one.
We did because we feel like we found the best version of that, being the legacy version,
the Tron remix version, yes, which distills it down. And the motion picture, we've talked extensively about how it was a big fail and set the franchise back, and it was only through the grace of Wrath of Khan that we really got Star Trek in its 80s through 90s into the early 2000s incarnation. And then there's this guy. And Joe, this movie fucking sucked.
It is slow. It is a little boring. I think that this would also benefit from a cut that is the 35 to 40 minutes. That's something interesting. Like, this is an episode of Star Trek, but it's an hour and 45 minutes long.
Motion picture was a objectively bad movie because it was too high concept for the Star Wars wave they were trying to ride.
Right.
A little too art house, too slow. But there's a beauty to all that, right? Blade Runner was a failure in the theaters through its first run and went on to become a cult classic. And there's really something to be said about long form sci-fi and, like, beautiful cinematography and all that other stuff.
It lingers in ways that are interesting, not boring. Just there's something going on here. There's a sort of intention, a creator intention here that you pick up on. And I think that it's a much more defensible kind of bad.
I wouldn't even call it bad. It's just, it wasn't what they should have been going for.
Defensible failure then. It's not bad, but it doesn't quite work.
Right. This guy, well, let's get into it. Let's get into this fucking turd.
Well, I think what you're trying to capture here is where maybe the motion picture fails in execution because it's just not quite delivering on what it intended. It's like you said, too high art house, too high concept for Star Wars fans, and it's a little too meandering and kind of like has plots that just don't quite connect or work for the deep fan, and in the end you have a bit of a mess of a movie where characters don't really have arcs. I think that's what Tom Selinsky said when we were talking about it, and I completely agree with that assessment. This one, they have a plot, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do. Some of that is interesting, but what I said before, I stand by. You can probably take the 45 minutes of this movie that's capturing those ideas and just make it like the intermediary act between this and Voyage Home.
I feel like they categorically fuck up everything they attempt to do in this movie. It is mishandled across the board, and I don't know if that's a directorial issue. I don't know if it was just a dud script to start out with. I don't know if there was problems with the production and budgeting stuff. But I will tell you right now, there's exactly two things I care about in this movie. All right, it's the sexy ladies.
There's definitely one.
There's two. All right, there's Valkyris and there's the Excelsior.
Okay. I was going to say, like, yeah.
There's your super cut right there. You give me tall, imperious Klingon hottie. You give me everything with the Excelsior. Roll credits.
Done.
Great movie.
Just done.
There's your Criterion cut right there. All right.
So we're like when we reviewed Khan, we're not going to try and summarize the entire movie beat for beat because we want to keep this to a trim hour if we possibly can. Failed so far in doing DS9 stuff. Brief.
That's a whole other thing.
2 hours on the emissary, but at least there, I think that's the whole.
It's
that's
warranted.
Yeah, it's wanted. I like that it's picking up right where the second one left off. Right, it's a strong,
very
move.
Weird.
Yeah.
How many movies can we name off the top of our heads that are a direct continuation? Evil Dead.
Quantum of Solace, the second James Bond movie with Daniel Craig, is a direct right after the credits of Casino Royale sequel. Maybe Matrix Revolutions. Not exactly one you want to quote, but that's like right after.
Have you seen that like Matrix has made this weird resurgence and like there's tattoos and like it's really connected with the teens?
Did the youth find the original or something?
Yeah.
Did they find did the Gen Zers finally discover the Matrix?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess like what is it, that weird Romanian sex pest? What's his name? Who's like on Twitter a lot. It's like the MMA guy. He talks about like being stuck in the Matrix a lot. I'm sure a bunch of Zoomers found it because of that. Forget his fucking name. Who cares?
So it's weird because it's a direct pickup and there's an expectation that you have watched Wrath of Khan. And I think this movie tries in several places to, bring you up to the speed of somehow you're beginning your experiences with the Star Trek movies with 3 when the perfect 2 was right there waiting for you and you made the mistake of going into 3. Right into the point where like the entire intro to this is just a recap, a clip show of the end of Khan, which
they love that last scene. I mean, that's not to say it's not perfect. Something they should love. It is iconic. It's incredible. It's emotional. When we watched Khan, even though you and I have lived our entire lives soaked in the pop culture, ambiance from which it sprung, even I am like watching be like, all right, enough, guys. Enough with showing me this tragic death and telling me that Spock and Kirk are friends.
Mm-hmm.
I fucking get it. It. I got it a long time ago.
Yep. I was there. I seen it.
But yeah, they really want to make sure you know what happened, even though like no one would have any business watching a direct sequel like this unless they had. And in a way it works because they pick up with this still pall over everyone, of course. They went through a traumatic experience. They fought Khan. Spock has died. Others have died. The ship got all fucked up. Everyone else has been reassigned. And they're coming back to base and no one wants to fucking talk to them. And it's very weird. Because a lot has happened. You would think people would want to talk to them. But instead, they're just told to bring it in, right? Come into space dock, all right?
To be fair, it's the Enterprise, and it has saved the Federation and Galaxy a fair amount up to this point. So, like, no time's ever as great as your first. And
it's like, whatever. It's like a Tuesday, Jim. You did it again, I guess.
Okay, great. You saved the day. That's kind of what's expected and why we let you get away with literal murder at times.
I love the appearance of the battle damage, by the way, when they're coming into space dock. I actually thought that was a really nice touch to show, like, actually, this was quite a battle and a significant amount of effort was required for success. And the Enterprise is actually in bad shape as a consequence.
So they had the fight with Khan. It took them a while to get back up to ship shape. I'm guessing other ships came over to either assist with the repairs or bring supplies, as well as offload the recruits who had been on a training exercise.
Correct.
And Kirk covers that as they're coming back in. Like, they're down on staff, they're limping along. Scotty's got a throwaway line in there that he's finished his automation upgrades, which is going to be important later when they're flying the Enterprise around with all of 6 people, I think. And we get our first view. There's a lot of firsts in this movie, and you know, looking at this through my Enterprise glasses, Enterprise the series glasses, like, this is a shitty movie, and I didn't really enjoy it, but there's a lot of cool world building and like resource stuff. Like, this is the first appearance, I believe, of Space Dock.
It is. This is the first time it's ever used.
First time we see an Excelsior. First time we see an Oberth. There might have been one other like new thing we saw in there that like would persist out into the 24th century. It's a weird. I'm curious. Are these just set pieces still laying around from Rathacon?
Oh, almost certainly. The budget for this is got to be an interesting deep dive. Unfortunately, like I like that there's a ton of detail, of course, in these movies, particularly in the Memory Alpha, but it's so much that you can't really necessarily read it easily. It does appear like this movie was a huge budget savings for some reason. They didn't spend much on this at all. Didn't feel like it anyway.
It does. This movie felt incredibly cheap and shitty.
Yeah, which is odd considering how successful Khan had been. It's not like this has got to be a cheap sequel.
And that's what I don't understand. You just blew Khan out of the fucking box office, like just huge, right? Blockbuster shit. This told Paramount or CBS or whatever the fuck they were as an entity back then. I don't know if this was still under Sumner Redstone's watch or what, but like, wow, Star Trek can make big money. This is worth us creating an entire future. Khan is going to give us the next generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and 10 Berman Era, whatever. You're going to come in with this fucking thing. Like, what really stood out to me through the entire thing, how bad the seats looked on every starship. It looked like these guys were sitting on fucking patio furniture cushions.
Particularly on the Excelsior. Very, 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 very
lime
cheap.
green on the Excelsior. What was it? The Grissom, the Oberth class. Like, imagine being told, "Hey, cool, you're gonna be a captain. This new science vessel scouty thing. I'm sorry, are these pink seats? I'm gonna pass on the command."
Well, it's an Oberth. You are on the rinky-dink science sled that gets destroyed. That's your goal in life.
As far as I can tell, this is the first one to be literally one-shotted, accidentally exploded. So I would say he probably came on, saw the pink seats, wanted to quit, but was foolish enough not to, and he paid for that mistake with his life, Joe.
Yeah, such a cheap looking movie. I don't know if maybe the money ended up in a lot of people's pockets as a consequence of a payoff for how well things did with Khan, and then they didn't leave themselves with too much because it's like, well, we're just going to reset, use some sets. You know, we're just going back, and then we're going to do some outdoor shots, and that's going to be the end of it.
I've got a screen grab I got of Kirk going into the turbo lift. I'll have to put it up on the support group. There's a piece of shit ripped off the wall. There's like this weird, I don't know, like a packing material bubble.
Yeah.
In the turbo lift wall, and one of them is ripped out. And it doesn't look like battle damage or anything else. It just looks like someone accidentally put a hole in the wall and no one bothered to fix it, and they filmed it. And all the stuff down on Genesis looks like shitty. It just looks like shitty old Hollywood. Is I think a great way to put it.
It feels like a slightly elevated version of the 1960s television show. That's what it felt like. Nothing about this movie belies a cinematic budget, really. And that's why I say it feels like it's just the core of this could have just been a 45-minute episode of Star Trek. It wouldn't have felt out of place, aside from the very nice cameras, obviously, that they're using at this point.
Great ship models. Like, all the space stuff looked fucking dope. And was it ILM that handled all this stuff?
As usual, yeah.
They knocked it out of the park. Anything that was actors standing around, like parts of it, when they are making their jailbreak with McCoy and Uhura has commandeered a transporter room. Did you see the amount of like scrapes and fuck ups on the walls in that room? Like, part of me is like, oh, cool, this must be like a cargo room and they're bringing stuff in and shit's scraping the wall. I'm like, I think this is just an old set they didn't bother to clean up at all.
They're just like, it looks lived in. Fuck it. The budget look of it is weird considering the success of the prior film. The plot makes sense though, right? Like, okay,
we got to jump back to the look of it being weird. Let's talk about perhaps the biggest moops for this movie, Saavik.
Well, you can't get Kirstie Alley again. She's too big. It's not happening.
So that was her debut, right?
It was.
And then what? Did she grab Cheers?
I think so. She grabbed something, obviously. She was not interested in coming back.
Well, everything I read said that they wouldn't give her what she wanted. Maybe this is like, hey, I see these guys and their careers are stuck in conventions and they are Star Trek people forever and I don't want to be that. Like, maybe that was a big part of it. Or maybe it's just, hey, I know what I'm worth. And again, this is just a cheap ass movie and they weren't willing to hit that price, but what a mistake, because this lady they got playing Saavik in this thing misses the mark big time for me.
I don't think that she's bad. I think that she has the misfortune of playing a character that has already been established in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, I agree. It is jarring because she's just not acting like the way the character was played before, right? Kirstie Alley was, I don't know. She was definitely somebody who was more, felt younger, felt more militaristic, less science-y, right? She was somebody that was on a track that was more akin to Kirk's, right? She had
charisma despite being Vulcan.
Her Vulcan manner also was much more authentically dialed in, not showing much emotion. Whereas the new actress is like a little chippy, a little like sarcastic, doesn't have the same warmth, is doing science stuff, which is not what she was doing before. She was like in a command track role.
Yeah.
That's not to say that if she was just a completely different character, I don't think it would have been bad. It's just, she's just not the character she's playing, because we know
why did it have to be Saavik? Why couldn't that have just been a Federation scientist assigned to work this Genesis thing? Why couldn't she have been a Grissom crew member that was working with David?
I think it had to be Saavik because they needed to tie back into the intimate story that's happening here, right? Like, we know Saavik is somebody that was being mentored by Spock, who was being mentored by Kirk as a next generation leader. And so she, having her in this position where she is there with Spock on the planet and with David still connected to this affair when Kirk shows up, like, that all makes sense. Like, if I'm writing for this movie, I want you to continue to get invested with these characters, right? Like, I need to continue to build a relationship between the audience of these characters, and I need to build the relationship between the characters and each other. And so putting her into this movie makes sense. Putting her into a movie where she's having to deal with investigating this makes sense. It's that she should have been like the second in command of this Oberth, right? Like, all right, you obviously know what the fuck you're doing. You just like got done, riding shotgun with greats, getting, taking care of a horrific situation. We're going to run a science ship out there. You're going to take over XO. You're going to bring Dr. Marcus with you, and you're going to go investigate this. And you're going to be the person on the spot for like the actual, like, tasking a crew together. Like, we're going to have to go down there. We're going to have to take samples. We're going to do scans. And so that all makes sense, but it's very passive.
And it makes sense too, because Genesis is a big secret. It's out there, but the details are a secret. And that is something I do enjoy in the movie, is that, you know, the reason for Enterprise just being completely sidelined and no one giving a shit about any of that right now is because Genesis was detonated. This top secret project that the Federation had been working on has been exposed to the galactic community as a whole, and it is rightfully being recognized as one of the most potent weapons of mass destruction that the Alpha Quadrant has ever seen. And that was a great part of Khan, was the debate between Spock and McCoy on, is this thing a science experiment or is this the new atom bomb? And clearly everybody's leaning towards the later on this thing. So Starfleet's put out a gag order. I like the scene between Kirk and what's the dude's name who's in charge of Starfleet, basically?
Fleet Admiral Morrow.
What was the previous? The first captain of Enterprise was what? Forrest?
April.
That would have been cool if that was that guy, but no, your request to go back out is denied. We're not going to refit the Enterprise. It's 20 years old. Fun line there. And you guys are going nowhere near that place. It is a big hotbed of contention, and the Federation is wrapped up in massive votes right now, and everybody's wondering what the fuck's going on. So it was surprising to even see the Grissom dispatched out there to go do any science and be in that area at all. But yeah, having what's her face out there in a formal command role, since she's already got heavy experience with that, does make total sense. They should have played it up more.
They should have, and I think the fact that the Federation is aghast at like what they have accidentally caused, and that means there's a gag order, no one's allowed to talk about it, and you're definitely not allowed to go there right now because everyone in the entire galaxy is looking at us like we're the assholes because we made a doomsday weapon. And we kind of have to answer for that because we're supposed to be the good guys, you know? And what was it, the line from Avengers? I'm not cocky when I've accidentally made a murder bot. Like, okay, whoopsie daisy. We sent
How
out
could
our
this
shittiest.
ever have happened?
We sent out our shittiest ship to take a look and do science, but other than that, no one's allowed to go near it. Okay, like we're gonna have a lot of meetings. I like that. I like that Morrow's like, yeah, Jim, listen, I know you're attached to your ship, but it's an old beater now, and also you ran it hard and hung it up wet.
Those are city miles. Yeah,
like did you see what your hull looks like, brother? Like you got real good.
Jim, I don't know what to tell you. A green hand grabbed the goddamn thing like a frisbee.
Like the amount of time your shit has been rocked is pretty crazy. There's not much left.
We were kind of hoping it would just blow up after you guys, abandoned ship, and we wouldn't have to have this conversation with you. No. Insurance is no longer covering the damage you're putting on this thing.
Yeah, it's a total loss. Right? It's going to the wrecker. And
have you seen the chair that you sit in?
It is not comfortable.
There is so much Coke spilled into that cushion. It will not wash out, Jim.
I will say, nobody really cares in the movie that the Enterprise is going to be decommissioned. It's okay. Everyone's going to be everyone's on shore leave. No one talks about this except for you, Scotty. We actually have to send you off to work. We're going to promote you to captain, which is something that's maintained through the rest of Scotty's appearances in Star Trek, which are quite a few from this point forward. He's a captain, but he's still just the chief engineer. Now promoting him to captain and having him be the engineer on something like the Excelsior, given the context in which the Excelsior is introduced, makes a lot of sense. It's an experimental engine. You take somebody and you promote them to a very high rank to represent their incredible engineering expertise in operating essentially a bleeding edge piece of technology in a team that is going to maintain it. And that person is still inferior in rank and position to the actual captain of the vessel, but it demonstrates like this. You can have quite a senior staff of engineers that are going to be necessary to run this thing. And that's what that's supposed to kind of translate to. also, like, Scotty does have command experience. He was the second officer on the Enterprise, and there's quite a few episodes where he's in charge. But uh, no one, while that's happening, it's like, what about we want to take the Enterprise? I'm like, nah, it's done. And everyone's like, all right, like we're gonna steal it later, but they're not like, oh boy, not our ship, right? They're more concerned with what's going on with McCoy. What are we gonna do about this whole thing that happens when Spock finds out, or Kirk finds out souls are real. And he may have left his buddy's like body somewhere he shouldn't have, and now McCoy's going crazy. He's got two souls in him, and he's having a bad time. No one really cares about the Enterprise. Like, I guess it's a machine that's at the end of its life. Even Scotty's not that sentimental about it.
I really enjoy the scene at the end, not even the end, and that's part of the problem on this. It's such a long movie, and it goes way past the point of like the peak of interesting stuff. After Kirk self-destructs it, and like the hull is just burning as it goes crash landing onto Genesis, and like everyone's kind of like wistfully looking up, and Scotty's got this look on his face like, I just fixed this fucking thing. We were gonna blow up. I locked that bitch down. I fixed I got the automation running, and you fucking blew it up over 6 Klingons.
Son of a bitch.
Mm-hmm. You could have beamed them into space.
The part of this movie that just drags on too well. No, before we get to that, I like the mysticism of this movie too. I'm sorry, yeah, this is the first time you get a lot of Vulcan mysticism. I like the Vulcan mysticism, especially at the end. They definitely made a point of having it feel like ancient Old Testament, like Judaism. It's got that sort of Bronze Age religion feel to it. You know,
it feels like Conan the Barbarian, swords and sorcery, mysticism. But unfortunately, a lot of that is buried underneath. What was this? 86? A lot of that's just buried under hokey ass late 70s, early 80s goofy disco outfits and helmets with power crystal horns. And there's the crusty old high priestess who's wearing lipstick for some reason. And then she's got her hoe train of young hot priestesses that all have like banging showgirl bodies. And they're walking around this soundstage on Vulcan with this boring ass Mylar backdrop. And again, just
they're in Mount Seleia, which we know what that looks like from Enterprise.
But it's like big sets made very cheaply, and it all just bleeds through and looks low rent and shitty and distracting. Sarek, pretty good in this movie.
Yes. His emotional side comes out. He loves his son. He's like, well, hold on, like, where's his soul? What happened? He would have given it to you. He knows that, like, right from the rip, right? Like, obviously he gave it to you, Jim. You're the guy. You're his friend. Mm-hmm. I understand enough to know that. And he's, Kirk has a whole thing where he's like, I don't understand what the fuck you're talking about. And let Sarek mind meld with him. Be like, trust me, go in, bud. Like, sure, check it out.
While you're in there, check out the Orions. Had some fun there.
Help yourself. Quite a buffet.
I'm gonna give you access
across this quadrant. Will Riker, you got nothing on me, man.
Nothing, not a goddamn thing.
I'm the OG.
This guy who plays Sarek, what a fun role for him to have. He's in the original series once or twice, right?
Mark Leonard, yeah. He plays the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, which is like the first time he really shows up, and then he plays Sarek from that point forward.
You get the Sarek stuff there, you get the Sarek stuff in the movies, and even to get to go into TNG for a bomb-ass send-off. That one where Sarek's got to put his problems into Picard.
Yep.
And this dude really gets to flex some cool emotional muscle and, have one last hurrah at Picard's expense. Like, I liked all that a lot. I'm sitting there watching, or like, where could they have put this thing? And somehow Kirk's having a big brain fart where he doesn't remember that his other best friend, Bones, has been acting like Spock to disturbing levels, even going so far as to somehow talking like Spock in the dark. Oh, wait, maybe he's Bones. And then they do this funny thing where they sit down and they pull up this flight recorder, which just has extensive footage of Khan.
Yeah.
That right back there in the old original series. They got cameras
Security
in the
cameras.
ship.
Yeah, sure do. At very good
Voyager,
cinematic angles.
I'm talking to you.
What are you talking about? Voyager had security cameras. We saw
that
it.
One time they did, yes.
That one time. There was one time they had cameras.
Mm-hmm.
It was the our episode Katie with the good hair with the Oregon Trail spirit board that had a security camera in it.
Yeah. Didn't they when Seska, something with Seska, they caught her with security cams once too, I think.
Maybe there was 2 times it had cameras. There was one time in particular though.
Yeah.
I do like Sarek a lot in this too. I like the way that he is emotional, is very like angry, which is more suitable to his character. He's not someone who would be modeling. And Kirk is great in this film. I'll say that. He dedicates himself to the necessity of taking the actions he does, and up to and including saying that it doesn't matter if he believes anything that is happening is really true. He owes it to his best friend to try regardless, and you believe it. And that's good enough.
It's a sloppy way to write David off, right?
Oh yeah.
But the act of David dying gets great mileage, obviously later in like Undiscovered Country and shit, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, the ends justify the means, I guess, and it's a bad death scene for him there. But even by the end of this thing, when Sarek's like, "Thank you, I appreciate your help in restoring my son. As a token of my appreciation, let me just highlight how fucked up it is. Everything you just did, the number of people you just got killed, a starship destroyed, your son murdered. Thanks. Was it worth it? Was that much shit worth it?" And Kirk's like, "Well, obviously, yeah. Spock's my boy. Fuck that kid. I don't know.
I barely kneu that kid. Spock's been my best friend for decades. Let's go. We did it. There's a couple of spots where this movie had kind of recognized what it was doing with its premise that I thought was interesting, by the way. First, Spock literally does get resurrected, right? I mean, which should be an earth-shattering revelation for everyone. And every time people consider it, it kind of is. Because right before the poor Oberth gets its, shit blown up, the Grissom gets destroyed, Saavik calls
80
back.
people, by the way.
Just dead. Well, that's not really Kirk's fault, though. Saavik calls up to the captain of the Grissom and says, "Yeah, so we found a Vulcan child." And he's like, "The fuck you did?" Like, what the fuck do you mean a Vulcan child is down there? It's like, well, it's Dr. Marcus's opinion that this is Spock who was regenerated because of the matrix of the Genesis planet. And like the helmswoman, they just have a whole shot of the helmswoman kind of doing like that blink take and then like looking up at the captain like, are you fucking serious right now? This planet resurrected somebody? That's what you're fucking telling me?
What's this captain's name? Espinito or something?
The captain's Style. No, that's the captain of the Excelsior. We'll get to him. It's like JT Esteban or something.
Esteban, that's it. I need Esteban to be like, that is against God. Kill it.
This is an abomination.
This is Pandora's box. We must destroy this planet. I'm sitting there while I'm watching the movie because I'm desperate for something to make my time worth it on this thing. The Federation resurrection protocols that we beat the absolute piss out of Voyager over. The EMH specifically calls out that they have standardized resuscitation, resurrection protocols. I got to wonder at a certain level, is that like an offshoot of something Genesis related?
I mean, this is a stunning scientific revolutionary discovery, right? Like the not only is this device created life from lifelessness, it hasn't only created a planet literally from just a collection of matter within a nebula, which in canon, by the way, that is the explanation for why the planet ends up being unstable when they explore this in books. It is that the
So it
Genesis
wasn't the protomatter?
is that the protomatter made it so that the fact it was made with a nebula made it unstable because there was too much uncertainty in how that matter coalesced. So what they end up explaining when they do a book series about, and it's actually quite well explained in the book. And so I know it's B canon, but I think it's one
Yeah,
of
I'm
those
making
things
the
where
face right now. If anybody's
you're
wondering.
making the face, but I think this is a cool, at least at minimum headcanon way to explain what happened since they don't go into detail in the film. But the Genesis device basically, in order to work, David Marcus used protomatter to fill in sort of uncertainty gaps in the physics of having all of this matrix coalesce to create life. And when they tested it, it worked fine and everything was stable because they limited the amount of variables that needed to be gap filled by the protomatter. Okay. So when they tested it in the cave, right, that we saw in Wrath of Khan, it was because it was a much more limited sort of use of the protocol that made a stable biosphere. When they detonated the device in the nebula and created a whole planet, not just the surface of a planet being recreated, which was the intended next step, this is a whole another level. This was not the intended actual use of it. This result was a total potential unknown, and it attempted to fulfill its purpose to create the planet and create this stable biosphere, but it was asked to do too much, and that meant that the inherent instability of protomatter ultimately led to the instability and destruction of the planet, which I think that totally works as like an explanation for the made up science behind this, right? And the Federation had ultimately decided actually this thing probably would work if you did what they intended, which is detonate it on a planet and have it recreate a biosphere on there, but no one wants to try because it's too galactically uh,
Unsettling.
unsettling and controversial. So they end up scuppering the project.
It's funny because we talk about how the transporter and specifically the replicator are terrible for plot because they erase like 50% of the stories out there. It's just a technology that's too powerful and unbalancing. And this is another excellent example of Star Trek going too far. And I like that they use political unrest as the reason why it never rears its head again, at least as far as I know.
Yeah.
Why it would take the planet is reformed, Spock's corpse lands there,
Mm-hmm.
and it de-ages him to a small child and then rapidly ages him. Silly. Listen, there's never a clean resurrection story.
No.
Short of I went back in time and grabbed someone and brought them up to the future after they had already died, like, or cloning, I guess, but like I'm resurrecting someone with the same body they were always in. It never works out well, and for all intents and purposes, this might as well just be God snapping his fingers and or Cube bringing this guy back to life. That's really the point of this entire fucking movie is like, hey, we're bringing this guy back, so you're gonna hand wave how sloppy and goofy it is or whatever.
I think they weren't too far from making it more to work better because they set it up with, well, we shot the torpedo. It was the matrix was still active, and so when we did that, it affected Spock's body and actually restarted its biological functions in the same state as the newly created biosphere. So it not only restarted his functions, it de-aged him, right? Like there's a couple pieces of connective tissue missing
And that's exactly what I need. When they open that torpedo, it shouldn't have been a fucking robe laying in there. It should have been his body, like some gory ass sci-fi shit where it looks like a chest burster crawled out of his corpse.
Yeah.
And I could have bought that. And obviously you can't put that in this movie, but that's what it needed to be. Some part of him regenerated and crawled out of the husk of the old him.
I think that would have been way better. If you could have done that, that would have been the way to do it. Because that would have conveyed what they intended, you know?
It also, again, would have made it look fucking gross and not something that is fit for consumption in the Federation.
Yeah, not something you want to tell people about. It was nasty.
Right. And, you know, all the stuff we're joking about, like the Captain Esteban and his helmsman up on the Grissom being like, holy shit, what happened? Like, you can't have eternal life as a culture, right? Everybody's going to want to live forever. So either you as a culture need to be ready to say, hey, we are going to be an eternal civilization now, and the massive problems that comes with that, or you know, have a few elites who have access to that. So it can't just be floating around out there. So this thing bringing a guy who just got radiation nuked to death and Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead his ass. It's a big fucking deal. It's a great reason why Starfleet has locked this planet down, and it's a great reason why presumably all the Genesis files should have gotten flushed down the toilet, because this is, again, a real Pandora's box here.
Yeah, this is too much. We're fucking around with things we shouldn't be fucking around with. Let's not do that again. However, of course, when you accidentally create a doomsday weapon, you're going to get the attention of the Klingons, in particular one Klingon. And I want to talk about him for a second. In a casting choice, I don't think anyone would have said would have been great at the time, but I think worked super well for this film.
No.
Yes. I'm going to defend it. I will fight you. We are visited by our main antagonist for this film, Commander Krug, and he is played by Christopher fucking Lloyd, who I think really nailed the intention behind the character.
Not.
Yes, I think he did great. This is the first time we've seen like new Klingons really played on screen. They showed up very briefly, as you reminded me just before we started recording in motion picture. This is the first time we've had like a Klingon antagonist on screen in many, many years. So there's not exactly a ton of book to go off of here. But I think he kind of like captures what Klingons end up being in TNG for the most part. It kind of sets the tone. Making a face. Go ahead. Let me have it.
I will give this guy a little bit of a pass card on the fact that he didn't really have anything solid to go off of. Pulling the camera back a little bit here, I don't think that Leonard Nimoy did this movie any favors from a directorial standpoint.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's amateur hour all around, and you can kind of tell.
I think as well as he was able to flesh out what the character of Spock is, I don't think that he lent any of that wisdom to the lady playing Saavik.
No.
And I sure as fuck don't think that Leonard Nimoy had any special insight into what Klingons should be moving forward. Actually, jumping back to the motion picture, I think the 4 seconds that they're on screen there is a better portrayal than what you got here. There is nothing about the way Krug is presented that feels alien to me. If Krug was a human pirate, he would have been great. And again, there's a fair amount of get out of jail you have to give Christopher Lloyd, because the next 30 years or whatever of Klingon content that would come out after him, like, really makes him stand out like a sore thumb there. But there is nothing alien about him. There is nothing different about the way he's portraying this character. He is an unhinged dude who comes off as like weak and not warrior-like.
How would you say? I mean, I don't think that's true. I'm gonna fight you on this little dude. Definitely is willing to throw hands. Very clearly ambushes 3 different starships during the, 2 aren't exactly going to be challenges, but he does makes a run at the Enterprise, not knowing it's damaged, not knowing, they only had 6 people on board or whatever the fuck. So I don't think he's weak. He personally decides to strangle to death a weird parasite evolved creature just for the hell of it. Very Klingon of him.
That's
He
his fetish. All right, let's.
Yeah, he likes being choked, but he still just decided to kill it for no reason. He executes a subordinate with a disruptor, as all evil bad guys do occasionally kill their subordinates. He even kills his hottie girlfriend because she broke state secrets and looked at the Genesis information, and she died with honor.
She, one of my most interesting points, and let's talk about her real quick. So the Veltris?
Yeah, that sounds right. Name? Yeah, Valkyris, something like that. Valkyrie-looking lady, that's for sure, certain.
Sure. First time you see a Klingon female, 2 big things to know about them, which will be continued into the Duras family.
Yeah.
Minimal makeup on the face, small ridge. They're playing up like, hey, this is pretty lady. She's some sort of operative spy agent who has been able to get a hold of the Genesis reports that Kirk generated. I like that they're using these mercantile Marines or whatever the fuck they are, this trading vessel to go out and meet Krug for this rendezvous. Her deal, I read up on her. She was not romantically involved with Krug. Her story was that her brother had taken over the house after the father had died, and he did something shitty and got the house dishonored, and that she took this job specifically knowing that it was going to require her dying, and her act of sacrifice would restore her house back to honor.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that her love for Krug was for giving her a chance to wipe the stain off her family's history.
How Klingon. I love it. That's really neat.
Yeah. And, none of it's in the movie because the movie sucks.
But yeah, holy crap. Is she
I thought she was going to be around a lot. I was like, damn, look at her. Krug is a sociopath. Krug's a murderer. He just doesn't have that force of presence to that is just what's normally in Star Trek a Klingon, which is big black dudes with a lot of makeup and rock star armor on, right? Like, you're not going to get that out of
Christopher Lloyd. Lloyd. He's not as commanding a presence as some of the people that ultimately end up playing Klingons down the road. I will completely agree with you. That is true. That said, I don't think anyone would have thought Christopher Lloyd would have done as well as he did. I think that he portrayed the character he was assigned quite well. I think he set a template for what Klingons will eventually be throughout all of Berman-era Trek. I don't think he gets credit for that. And I don't think he comes off as weak. He definitely rises to every challenge he is given. He fails. Kirk kills him in the end after they have a classic double axe handle, wrestling match / Trek
That's
fight.
Its own fucking thing with low budget. When the Rock shoots out and throws him.
Oh yeah.
I think people could have done way worse than he did. And maybe that's the strongest thing to say about his performance, is that for being a guy that has no other references whatsoever, he didn't fuck it up. He didn't really seal the deal. Like, he's not going down as like one of the best antagonists ever by any means. I think they set him up in this movie as a strong contrast to Khan. And again, where they handled Khan perfectly in Star Trek 2, where it's like, this is a guy that can fucking literally strangle Kirk with his own asshole. Right. Yeah. And that should be the power level roughly that Krug is working on here too. You can't have these guys together for a fight because it's stupid when Kirk wins. You put them in ships, they're sparring, they're talking shit. It works out great. And when you do it the stupid way, which is they're fighting on a set piece that's falling apart, you get the hokey shit you got out of this movie. So
I don't completely agree with that point. Actually, I'm going to mention, I get where you're coming from, but I think Klingons have always been portrayed as stronger than humans, but not at Khan's level. we mentioned when we reviewed Khan, it was really smart to not have him fist fight Kirk because there would be cartoonish. There's no way he would win. But like, they fought Klingons in the original series. They are not portrayed as superhuman. They're just kind of like a tier higher, right? Which is a little different.
Actually, Joe.
Oh God. Okay.
Here we go. Klingons that they were fighting, those were augmented with human DNA, so those were technically weaker per Enterprise.
Which are they even stronger because they had augment DNA?
But that was all that stuff was removed though by Phlox.
Oh
right?
God. Okay. All right.
And that's the other interesting thing is I'm sitting there watching this and the portrayal of the Klingons, and I'm trying to like make this make sense in my head while I'm in the shower. Like, this was post, not that Harvey, whatever the fuck his name is, Harv Bennett, would have had any inkling of this whatsoever. But like, so this is post Enterprise. This is post TOS, but is this still an empire in a falling empire, or is this a fallen empire at this point? Is Krug maybe a little softer around the edges because we haven't hit 24th century dumb thug, everybody's a warrior, brain dead idiot Klingon empire? Like, is this guy still got some, like, I don't know, higher learning in him at some point? Because I know I can't remember his name, but the guy from Undiscovered Country, like, he's a very learned guy. The guy that's quoting Shakespeare as he's going at it with Kirk, right?
Well, so I feel like the Klingons in this kind of era are so clearly supposed to be Soviets that the conclusion that we were drawing from Enterprise isn't going to exactly work here.
No, but I'm trying to make it work and just
no, I know. Like, I know you're. I see what you're trying to do. I don't know what the answer to that is because of that, right? Like, I think that logic applies certainly to Berman era Trek, because now that's, now we're past the Cold War from most of that time, right? The Klingons got to represent something else. And I don't think it's a coincidence that by the time they start doing Klingon episodes, it's when it's time to try and figure out what that is, right? On TNG and forward. So, like, all of that logic still applies here, and then later on in Undiscovered Country, and kind of like the TOS sort of continuity. They're just the Soviets, and because they're the Soviets, that means that they're still going to have skullduggery and deceit and sophistication, rather than merely just being like a bunch of thugs.
Again, Krug missing the mark to me as what everything after him establishes as a Klingon. If we view this as the still falling empire Klingon, before this permeation of dumb thug warrior class, like, it gives him a lot more leeway to be like, this is not the type of Klingon that we're used to. It's not a TOS Klingon, but this isn't a 24th century Klingon. This isn't even the later movies Klingons. Like,
yeah.
This guy has very human-like, and by human I mean weaker or softer or more. He doesn't have that force of presence, really. Like, it gives him a lot more leeway in that. What did Krug's teeth look like? Do you remember?
I don't.
Were they
remember.
all fucked up and jacked up?
Christopher Lloyd wasn't talking with what sounded like an impediment, so I don't think he necessarily had dental prosthetics. I think, like, poor DeForest Kelly, he definitely his dentures were not fitted right. You can kind of tell for this movie. His lines were all very tortured relative to, like, just having watched him in Khan. And then later on, I guess he got better ones, but it's really just this movie where he just kind of doesn't sound quite right. Fun fact, when they did the DS9 Lower Decks episode, which I guess we'll have to watch at some point, when Armin Shimmerman played Quark, he did the voice acting with his old dental prosthetics in, because it's the only way he could make the character sound correct. He tried to do it without it. It's like, I can't do it. I have to have the shit in my mouth or I can't get to the right sound.
Do you think that he had kept those teeth the way that...
if Robert Picardo kept his fucking werewolf teeth, then I guarantee you Armin Shimmerman kept his.
That's what I was going for, was the werewolf teeth.
Must be a thing, right? Like, it's got to be a thing.
Mm-hmm. I can't find any pictures of Krug's mouth. I'm going to say Krug has better teeth, which again lends credence that this is not that this guy's cut from a different
You know,
cloth.
he's
And they
he's
call
still
him
got a
Lord
little
and
bit of
stuff.
the augment human DNA in him still. He's like a generation later it'll all get bred out, but he's got a little bit left.
It is interesting, however, that the costumes that they set up for the Klingons in this are just basically the de facto Klingon costumes for the rest of time.
And the disruptor too. Disruptor looks the same.
Disruptor, the whatever the clicky knife is with the
Tang,
hilt that pops out.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
They wanted Edward James Olmos for this role, by the way.
I think he
Couldn't
would
get
have
him.
been much better.
I think so too.
What the fuck was he doing that they couldn't get Almos? Blade Runner?
I don't think he was doing Blade Runner.
He's the one guy in Blade Runner. He's the other Blade Runner that does origami. I don't remember if Blade Runner was before or after this.
Yeah, Gaff. It was in 82. Was that. So he might have been locked up shooting that because this was 84. No, you would have been done with that. Was he doing TV? Hill Street Blues. He was on Hill Street Blues. Oh, no. Miami Vice. He was a main character on Miami Vice in 1984. He was busy.
Maybe he saw the script and was like, this fucking sucks. I'm not doing this. The Targ. You want to talk about low budget?
Yeah. Not the best puppet you've ever had, boys.
Thing over there looking like a Halloween decoration. The trick-or-treaters go to put their hand in the candy and snot comes out of this thing's nose and it looks left and right. The Klingon bridge, way too clean and sterile. But again,
they definitely, by the time they actually shoot the next movie, they have a different set for the Bird of Prey, and it looks like the Bird of Prey from TNG. I wouldn't be shocked if it was the same Bird of Prey that they started using on TNG, because I know that certainly was the case later on down the road, especially like when they did Star Trek 6. I think they used a bunch of TNG sets as well.
Including Cardassian Hallway.
And overall, as I think about more and more about like the pieces of this, I'm trending more towards your point at the beginning, is this movie just kind of doesn't work at all. I still think you could probably find a 45-minute episode here, but yeah, like you kind of know exactly what's going to happen in the movie before you even see it. And that's just from the title, right? You're going to buy back your big emotional beat from before. You're going to make sure everyone is reminded about that emotional beat, no matter how many times it takes, up to and including at the very end. And the movie's just a practice in getting from A to B. And because of that, it feels like it's just filling a bunch of time it doesn't need to fill. If they were going to do this story, it needed to be something a little bit different than what it is.
There's politics going on here. Nimoy didn't want to do Khan, and he said, all right, we took such a black eye on motion picture. If I'm going to come back into this, it needs to be a good script. And, he's this last minute. No, he wasn't a last minute. Yeah, he was a last minute addition, right?
He was a last minute addition in motion picture. And that's when we talked to Tom Selinsky, he said that's the only reason he had his own plot line is that they had to write one for him. Yeah.
But he goes, all right, if we're going to do this, and I watched these interviews with Nimoy, and like everybody's very sour on the experience of motion picture. Like they knew it was going to be bad and they didn't like this, blah, 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 blah. Khan, I'll do Khan, but I want you to kill me. I'm done with this shit. And then lo and behold, they knock it out of the fucking park. And he's like, well, I do want to still be in this. And I'm a big deal in this franchise. Perhaps I'm even more recognizable than Kirk. I want the directorial thing, and we need to get my character back in here. So that's like the out of character politics. Like you've got one of the most impactful deaths on screen in cinema, I think, top 10 easily. To walk that back, like I really wonder, like, were the fans happy? Like, yay, he's back. Or people like, I don't know, man. That's kind of cheap. Like that's cheaty. That's shitty.
I think people were happy to have him back. Spock is such an iconic character, as you mentioned. He may be the most famous character out of all of Star Trek. And yeah, they wanted him back.
I personally am happy to allow it, right? Like that they did it. Like you got a great character back who gets a lot more really good mileage. And that death scene was fucking dope. It's not like it was a shitty death where you're like, okay, this is a fucking speed bump and they're going to be back 6 hours later, like some fucking Voyager level main crew death, right? Like that could have been it right there. So it was a great scene when he died, and he's a great character to bring back. It's fine, but like the rest of this, all the Excelsior stuff is cool. The shots are great. You got this prick captain. We've kind of talked about it before. Like Scotty sabotaged the trans warp drive, which was supposed to be tested the next day, but Enterprise flies away. Real quick shout out, by the way, as we're talking about cheap, shitty stuff. The fucking helmets and hats they put security in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. Baseball hats with like straws taped to it.
And then these smoldering catcher guy would have been at home in these outfits.
These goofy bullet medieval archer helmets.
I was an adventurer. I was a Starfleet officer who took an arrow to the knee.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm sorry. What you work? Okay, this is a security officer stationed on deck Whiterun.
Yeah, that's real cheap and shitty. Excelsior's real cheap and shitty. The interior, the bridge of the Excelsior has to be the most bargain basement ass set I've ever seen in a fucking movie. That was comically cheap.
But you got Bob Morton from RoboCop as the ops guy.
That's true. Another RoboCop connection for you, bud.
Everybody from RoboCop is in Star Trek, killing it in their roles, man. We're gonna have to fucking review RoboCop.
Well, yeah, Bob Morton's also just kind of like the shitty ops guy, and he's like got 3 lines, and he's still great.
Yeah, just a smarmy. Yeah, we got a badass ship. We're gonna be right up their ass.
Don't worry, Captain, who's got a fucking writing crop because he is that extra.
Like, do you know what those are called? I actually looked. I was like, what is this fucking thing? Those are called swagger sticks, literally.
I'm the captain of the biggest fucking baddest ship in the world. We're gonna go break some records, aren't we, Mr. Scott? Let's go,
Captain Scott. So Scotty goes over there. He's supposed to be helping him get ready. You can't understate what's happening here. On top of the fact that Kirk's son dies in this quest to get, well, we'll get to that, but Kirk loses the Enterprise on top of all the other nonsense going on here. If Scotty sabotaged the engine of the transwarp drive of the Excelsior, which clearly he did, and if he never confessed to what he was doing, he has robbed the Federation of perhaps the most important piece of technology that they would have seen for the next 100 years.
Well, they do. He does get, it's part of his court-martial in Star Trek 4. And he did that. So everyone knows.
Oh, they do know.
Yeah. It turns out that just doesn't work, by the way. That's the canon. It just doesn't work.
Okay.
It's not Scotty's fault. But fair enough. It is the amount of crimes, though, that they commit is quite spectacular. They assault a bunch of Starfleet security officers, break someone out of prison, beam illegally onto the Enterprise, steal it, take it to a planet that's quarantined, and get it destroyed. And then hijack a Klingon vessel, which is
potentially
probably
go to war with the Klingons.
Potentially go to war with the Klingons. Shoot
which, to
at
be
them,
fair, Krug's asking for it.
Yeah, he wants it. He started it. And then Scotty definitely sabotages another Starfleet vessel, the most advanced one in the fleet, as part of this scheme. Like, these guys are definitely at 4 to 5 stars on the wanted.
Yeah, while we're talking about the heist, Uhura, who gets written off real quick on this thing.
Poor Uhura. She's got nothing in any of these movies, does she?
She can sit right there next to Gates McFadden. Only, unfortunately, she didn't get her chance for Kirk season 3 to actually, turn into a pretty good character the way that Crusher became in Picard season 3. Her throwaway scene in this entire movie with this fucking jackass floppy hair transporter guy. Real low point of the movie. That guy, I don't know who he was. I don't know where he went after that, but like, did he win a contest at his community college and get to go and be in the Star Trek movie and just practice
Congrats.
really, really hard? Here's my question. Did Kirk kill David?
No, I wouldn't blame him for his death. Like he didn't do anything that made Krug do it. I mean, he actually tried to stop Krug from what he was doing. He's like, no, I'll cooperate. I don't want you to kill anybody. And he just did it anyway.
Yeah, but big picture. I mean, certainly dropping Khan off on a planet free and clear set this entire chain of events off, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, if you want to take it all the way back, yeah.
So that's his fault. And then
sure. All of this is his fault if you want to take it that far back. Sure. Yes.
Through Wrath of Khan, though, did Kirk really have an opportunity to do something differently that would have prevented this movie from happening?
I mean, he could have just taken Spock's body back, but then Spock wouldn't be alive. So if you're acting the presumption that
Spock, if he never shot Spock out of the torpedo bay, then that means that David would have been on the Grissom, which would have gotten blown up anyways.
True.
So I think really, minus the Khan, the Khan failure of justice there, I think David was on this course to die himself the entire time.
Yeah, and like you said, it's kind of a crappy write-off. I don't really understand the choice. They establish this character. He builds a bond with his father. He's in the next movie. You feel like this is going to he's going to be a new guy. You know, he's going to be connected, and whatever future adventures happen here with Kirk, like, it only makes sense, right? Like, this gives him a whole different dimension to go on. Like, he's going to be involved in his son's life. His son's an adult. He's a fucking PhD having super scientist, like totally different path in life, but still very much like his dad. There's so much to do there. And then they just decide that, you know, not only are we not going to do that in this movie, we're just going to fucking kill him off. Like, I don't like it. I don't like it. As much as I think
excellent mileage out of his death once it happens. But like two big things happen in this movie. One, you've got Genesis, which they make the decision to destroy. Genesis's creation was a huge thing in Star Trek 2, and then you have the revelation that Kirk's got a son, and he, like you said, he repairs and then you go into this movie and you destroy both of those things. And why? Destroying Genesis is a good way to make sure that Genesis technology moving forward is never brought up again, because it's proven to be too dangerous to exist, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But his son, like, what threat does he pose to the story? Because his son has a really unique standpoint where this is the one guy that can like call his dad out at any point and be like, you're being a fuck. You're a bad dad. You know, I'm not under your control. I'm not in your chain of command. I'm not even in Starfleet. And I can tell, you know, at any point in any stories later on, I can tell you you're wrong and there's nothing you can do. And you have to listen to me because we have this bond. And I think that would have been a very important story thing. Cause like at the end of the day, like, Bones and Spock can check Kirk on things, but this guy's storytelling utility, I think, is very powerful. And again, killing him off, if they had the foresight in this to say, listen, if we have Krug kill him, man, we can make Kirk hate the fuck out of the Klingons, and what exciting things we can do with that. But you could have found other reasons for Kirk to hate the Klingons. You can't have another adult male call Kirk out on his bullshit and tell him he's being a bad guy quite the way you could with this. So real head scratcher there.
That everything you just said is completely correct. I couldn't agree more. It's a very head scratching decision. There was so much you could have done here. I think like a Star Trek 4, 5, or 6 down the road where you still have Kirk, you know, like you said, uniquely vulnerable, but also potentially uniquely powerful as a consequence of his son's presence in his life. And you've spent that to have the drama of his death. which I don't think was an even trade, as well as they make it work ultimately in Star Trek 6. Star Trek 6 plot works only because of his death in Star Trek 3. So I'll grant that, but I don't think it was worth it. I think the alternate future where David Marcus survives this film and continues to show up in Star Trek movies thereafter as a foil to his dad in different ways, potentially as a stationed civilian scientist on the Enterprise in future missions, would have been a better path than what we did.
I like how he called Starfleet out as military and Khan.
Yeah.
And I think had he pursued a political path, having a bad relationship with your son who's anti-military could have been some nice curveballs for him to have to navigate. I don't know. Maybe it's documented somewhere and we can look into that, but the Savick mercy fuck on child Spock was, very erotic.
I mean, the fact that they do bang and that in the books Savick becomes pregnant from that.
What?
Yeah.
You and these fucking
it is
books,
canon,
Joe.
by the way. It is canon that they fucked. Like, that is confirmed.
Isn't that what the fingers rubbing is?
Well, no, like off screen, they fuck. Cut back to daytime and their clothes are back on and
they're laying under their duty jackets. Real quick, the wardrobe in this is terrible.
Oh god,
where the
civilian clothes
the
not
Starfleet.
Good.
I wonder if this is like a Picard thing where it's like, I'm not being in the spacesuit. The spacesuit's uncomfortable. I want to be in civilian clothes that are comfortable. And that's why, like, I can excuse everybody except for Sulu in his leather cape and Kirk in this god-awful burgundy old lady outfit. Like, just these guys need to be in uniforms. And I think they learned that lesson in the later movies. Especially when you come in with Kirk or Khan and you debut these beautiful burgundy seafaring outfits.
Yeah, and then you barely use them. So, anything else you want to go over in this movie? I feel like we've got it all down.
The lack of music. There's a lot of really barren soundscapes in this thing, and I think that it is part of why it feels as cheap as it does. There's big stuff that happens that just has no sort of like orchestral underlay or any sort of music feeding into it. And normally it's not something I notice, but I know it's a big deal for you. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, the score coming in and out of space dock is iconic, certainly. But yeah, I mean, after Khan was just blew me away with reminding me how good its music was, this wasn't as good, which, it's the same guy. So it's like hard to like talk shit. Right. But maybe, like you said, maybe they just didn't give him much time. Maybe they didn't have as much money. I don't know what happened here, but they clearly spent all their effort on doing Star Trek 4. I don't know. Like, maybe that was the decision. I'm like, all right, we're gonna have this intermediary chapter where we're gonna get fucking Spock back into the story, and then we're gonna do our fun time travel thing back to the 80s, and we're gonna blow it out with that, right? I don't know. Which, I mean, that worked. It certainly worked in their favor in terms of box office return. I think Star Trek 4 is probably beloved by normies more than most films in the Star Trek canon.
It's fun. It's accessible.
It is.
Kirk's line when he kills Krug. So the world's falling apart, which on paper sounds great. Like, okay, there's this epic fight as a planet is literally falling apart and magma and fire shooting out of the ground. If only it didn't look like we were doing it in someone's backyard with shit they had laying around their house. Krug falls back. He's hanging on the edge. Kirk, as a good guy, is like, give me your hand. I'm going to try to save you for whatever fucking reason. And then Krug instead grabs his foot to try and like pull Kirk down with him. And then Kirk kicks him in the face with this line of, I've had enough of you.
Comic beat, almost.
And that's exactly what it was. It's like, come on, like, this dude's the reason why you just lost your ship. which you should really be kind of fucked up about. You sat there and watched the goddamn thing going down. He killed 80 people on a science vessel.
Yep.
Which he sits there like hailing the Grissom for like 16 minutes. Like, at what point do you realize, hey, something's fucked up here? Not that he would have a reason to expect that there are Klingons there, but still. And most importantly, this guy just killed your fucking son. And like, there's this point, especially in like 80s sci-fi, 70s sci-fi, where like your good guy has to be a good guy, and your good guy can't like go Game of Thrones on people. But again, he just had your son fucking stabbed needlessly, executed with a knife. Like, him flipping out and having like a moment and being like, this is for David, motherfucker. You don't kill my goddamn son. There's no one around to watch what's happening here right now. Eat my fucking boot.
Yeah.
Go to hell, literally. Like, that whole thing hit on a goofy level, and the only way I can rationalize is that they didn't want to portray Kirk as a bad guy.
Even though it would have been like the most justified, yeah, I'm just killing you now. Like, I don't think it would have come off as being a bad guy if you just said, like, you murdered everyone on the Grissom and you murdered my son. You're not leaving this planet. And just that's the end. That's the beginning and the end of it. And he's like super into it because he's a Klingon. They fight and he kills him. And it's just doesn't have to be anything else to it.
Kirk could have just, had reservation and been like, you got to stand trial. The Federation needs to know something. Like, I don't want to save you, but here, give me your hand. And the guy grabs his foot and pulls him in and just like, what the people of the Grissom and my son weren't enough. You got to try and kill me too. This ends. Kick, goodbye. Not, I've had enough of you. Like, just, I did like the one Klingon warrior up on the ship and like, hey, you said you're going to kill me. Oh, I lied. See you later. Get out of here, bitch.
It's like, wait a second. You promised to kill me. I didn't want to survive.
Overall, on the movie, my taste in all of this, it feels like it is a big vanity piece. The whole point of the entire movie is to get Spock back, which kind of works out because you've got a guy directing it who should be in the movie and doesn't have to be in the movie, realistically, right? Like, okay, cool, Leonard Nimoy can direct the movie because he's not in it. But like, all the repeats of his line, the whole thing feels so self-indulgent, like my character is important. We're going to explore why my character is important. It feels like the guy at the Dungeons and Dragons game becoming the dungeon master and running an adventure campaign about his character.
Yeah.
And doing a shitty job doing it.
Which is funny because he directs the next movie, which is just way better. And obviously he's in the whole thing the whole time. So maybe he learned from the experience. I don't know. But I think your analogy is correct. And is how I would describe it as well. And I think we're looking forward to doing Star Trek 4, and we're going to hit a few other things, maybe RoboCop.
Definitely RoboCop.
Before we do, but yeah, a disappointing sequel. This is considered one of the lower tier Star Trek movies. I think that's a fair way to describe it. I will say this, though. Amongst the Star Trek movies that are considered bad, which would be Motion Picture, Search for Spock, Final Frontier, Insurrection, and Nemesis, I would say Motion Picture's a little better than this, but it's the next one down. It's definitely better than Final Frontier, Insurrection, and Nemesis, and by a lot. I didn't hate the movie. It just didn't necessarily come together the way maybe they thought it did.
Its biggest crime is it's too fucking long.
Yeah. It should have been a half hour to shorter, maybe at least.
Oh, it's a half hour total. I was like, yeah, I could do half
maybe
hour.
45 minutes. Like, you could do a supercut of this if it's 45 minutes. It's probably B-, and that's way better than having to watch Star Trek 5, which God help us when we get there. But that will be for the future for our Patreon listeners and others down the road. So thank you all for supporting the show. We appreciate it, and we'll see you around.